Okay, this is my fourth and final review of All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Reading Keeley. I liked reading this book a lot. It was really interesting to see both perspectives. Obviously, I grew up with more Quinn's perspective. I was a kid. I have neighbors who are police. I always had the perspective that they were there to help and not harm. And I live in a little community that's mainly white people and not a community that's very welcoming towards anybody but white people. I know this because many things. I know the community has gotten better because my parents grew up here, and from talking to them about racism, they've told me that it used to be that families who were African American or Native American or just anybody who would move into this community would last like maybe a couple months before they had to move out because of how bad it was, and that was like in the 90s. So obviously it's gotten better, but it's not amazing, and we see a lot of racism still at our school. I can walk around and hear people say the N-word, and it's not even towards me. And I can't imagine what it would be like being a person of color and walking around and having to go through that all day. I can kind of sort of gauge the experience through this book, but I'll never personally understand it. And just reading this book in Rashad's perspective, as someone, I like to consider myself like a supporter of Black Lives Matter. I think it is a good movement, but I know there is still some part of like it being uncomfortable for me because I am white, and despite me like being in support of all this stuff, I still don't want to see myself as some sort of villain. But I have to try to put that all aside to support it. And reading this book and seeing everything through the eyes has kind of shown me that it still does make me a little uncomfortable, even if it is something that has been around. We've been talking about this since we talked about Martin Luther King when I was young, especially. We talked about racism a lot when Black Lives Matter in 2020 and everything came back. Or not even came back, it just had a big push. It's just, we didn't see it a lot because of the place I grew up in, which is here. And I think it's weird I think it's sad actually, that there are still places in America, because a lot of places, because this is not the only small town who still has a lot of racism in it. There are many out there. I think it's really sad that is still a sad reality of it. We've gotten better, but we still have a long way to go with racism and how we treat each other with respect and just not being horrible towards each other based on things we can't change about ourselves. And I think that is just probably the biggest thing I learned through this book, is that there's still a lot of change to go, even like everywhere, just within yourself, within myself. Even though I can consider myself in support of everything, there's still some part of it that makes me uncomfortable. The idea of all this, and within the whole world, there's still change that needs to happen. That's the biggest thing I learned through this book.